There's a SpongeBob episode that I'd like to talk about today. This episode is by no means lacking in popularity or notoriety. In fact, this episode is certainly one of the most recognizable in the series. And the episode I'm referring to is none other than Pickles. It's from season 1, episode 6B, I suppose. Much could be said about this episode, but there's an important lesson or two in particular that I would like to talk about today. So if that's of interest to you, then stay tuned. This channel exists to encourage you to continue to be a good person through lessons that are primarily rooted in biblical and Stoic principles. So without further ado, let's get into today's lesson from the SpongeBob episode, Pickles. To quickly remind you of the story within the episode, it opens with SpongeBob, as I like to say, going off. He's really doing a great job making some Krabby Patties, making a dozen patties at a time in a matter of seconds to the satisfaction of all the customers in the Krusty Krab. And wouldn't you know it, and I guess you would if you've seen the episode, but in any case, Bubble Bass rolls up and gives his famous order, which, as I've come to find out, I believe everything he said, though it sounded like it was just ridiculous made-up stuff. Oh, make the patty float on a raft and apply axle grease or something like that, amongst other things. I think most everything he said is actually, are actually ways to prepare food. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe I was misled, but at any rate, as he gives his order, Squidward essentially denies writing it down because of how ridiculous it is. Following that, SpongeBob and Bubble Bass then have a bit of a face-off. Apparently, they are familiar with each other. Bubble Bass says he's heard SpongeBob makes a quote-unquote mean Krabby Patty, and SpongeBob says that he hears Bubble Bass is pretty picky. SpongeBob then gives Bubble Bass the patty, of which he begins to eat. And this is the point in the episode where the famous line of his, or infamous rather, is stated. It's pretty good. Only one thing. You forgot the pickles. SpongeBob and the entirety of the Krusty Krab are in utter shock. Bubble Bass then receives his money back due to the money back guarantee on the menu of the Krusty Krab. SpongeBob then, still on the floor examining the burger, states, I know I put pickles on that patty. Mr. Krabs then literally throws SpongeBob back into the kitchen, where trouble then ensues. SpongeBob tries and tries to make a Krabby Patty, but seemingly he can't. He starts putting the sauce on the bun before the patty, starts making the patties with pans and boots in it. He then spirals into complete confusion and lack of his normal wherewithal. He states, I am so confused, I can't remember how to do anything, which wasn't actually the case. He simply was forgetting how to make a Krabby Patty. But your words do have power, as this episode makes clear, and as I will mention in more detail later. SpongeBob forgets where the front door of the Krusty Krab is, he forgets where he lives, forgets even how to get into his own bed, amongst many other things. Back at the Krusty Krab, there is literally smoke coming out of it, because Squidward is running the grill, of which he is not very efficient at. He's essentially cooking up rocks. He burned people's patties, fries, and even some guy's shake, which that's... Okay, the patties and fries are one thing. I don't really understand how he would... Anyway, this leads to the customers storming out of the restaurant in disapproval. Krabs then realizes and says, I've got to get SpongeBob back. He then walks to SpongeBob's house, and this is actually one of the few times he ever walked normally. He did actual normal steps as opposed to the quick, I guess, Mr. Krabs walk. As he walks into SpongeBob's house, he quickly notices that not only is the house in disarray, but so is SpongeBob, for he can't even talk correctly now, or rather, he's convinced that he can't. Krabs, to his credit, says to SpongeBob that he's just fine and he'll be back to making Krabby Patties in no time. All we have to do is get your confidence back, is what Krabs said, and that's absolutely true. Mr. Krabs then waits on SpongeBob until he finds his way back to sanity, and rediscovers his ability to make a perfect Krabby Patty. It should be mentioned that Mr. Krabs' efforts seem to have been more so for sake of the business and the success of it. And fair enough, you gotta make money, and SpongeBob is a paid employee. I understand that. That said, Mr. Krabs' tactic was very effective. Notice that he didn't try to win any argument, he didn't shame him into cooperation either. He actually waited literal days and nights for SpongeBob to finally recall how to make a Krabby Patty. Once again, it seems that Mr. Krabs was more so concerned with the success of the business as opposed to SpongeBob's well-being in general. That said, his actions could have been identical and had the same success, maybe even more, if done altruistically, as his intentions should have been. Do check out my recent video on that topic. It'll be somewhere in like the corner, I guess. As multiple days pass, SpongeBob finally speaks. He says that he can't make a Krabby Patty anymore. As he rattles off exactly how to make a perfect Krabby Patty, he does so, much to his surprise and to Mr. Krabs' satisfaction. This touches on the idea of paradoxical intention, which, quickly explained, is the idea that when you stress yourself abundantly due to overthinking when trying to attain something or complete a certain task, you will most likely not succeed. Falling asleep, for example, if you're overthinking that, in most cases will not help you fall asleep any sooner. And the inverse of that is commonly the case. Like with SpongeBob, he was no longer thinking about failing or making a perfect patty. He simply did it almost without thinking. Perhaps this topic is worth its own video, but for now, back to the story. SpongeBob then returns to the Krusty Krab with his rediscovered enthusiasm and ability. A passerby notices SpongeBob has returned and joyfully draws attention to it. So he and many other fish run into the Krusty Krab, and not 30 seconds following that, Bubble Bass 2 returns. "I thought I ran you out of town," he states, to which SpongeBob responds, "This is where I belong. Give me the regular, and this time, don't forget the pickles." "I didn't," SpongeBob responds. And as the entire Krusty crew and group of customers watch, Bubble Bass takes a bite out of the patty. He chews it for what seems to Mr. Krabs like an eternity, before finally uttering, "Still no pickles." SpongeBob again, and this time to a greater extent, is in shock, for he knows he put pickles on the patty, just as with the first one. Bubble Bass begins to laugh, exclaiming, "You failed again, SpongeBob Loser Pants." To which SpongeBob then notices that the pickles are in fact hidden under Bubble Bass's tongue, as well as the pickles from last time, and some girl's car keys, which it's rather surprising. I mean, the pickles is one thing, because that's food, but regardless, Bubble Bass, after being found out, exposed, if you will, runs out the door and doesn't return to the Krusty Krab until episode 19, if that is in fact the same guy. This final interaction with Bubble Bass is actually a very good portrayal of the idea that those who are not working to bring about good, but in fact are doing the opposite, and even the devil himself overplay their hand at some point. Like with this example, it was the fact that he was laughing that led to him exposing himself as a fraud. Point being to rest assured that in the final analysis, good triumphs over evil. After running off Bubble Bass, SpongeBob then is praised for his job well done. He then, to his great credit, doesn't just soak in the praise, but draws attention to Squidward's efforts to hold down the fort while SpongeBob was gone. Squidward appreciates this, and though the citizens wind up booing him, and shame on them for that, it was kind of SpongeBob to try something nice for Squidward anyway. So then, what is the primary lesson to take away from this episode? Well, I would say that it's to not let others convince you that you are incapable of something, or another way of explaining it is to stop second-guessing yourself. But I suppose the broader point that I want to make, and hopefully make clear, is not only that words have power, whether an encouraging word or discouraging one, but also what you choose to believe, or to what extent you let something influence you. Just like with this example, SpongeBob knew for a fact that he had put pickles on the patties both times. So therefore, he shouldn't have let anyone saying otherwise discourage him. He should have just looked into it and then proved to everyone that he was right. When you know you are capable, don't let anyone convince you otherwise. As much as this channel primarily consists of practical ways of treating others well, I also like to mention ways to treat yourself well, thereby making it in any facet and to whatever extent easier for you to continue doing good to others. I will always preach that doing good ought to be done in spite of circumstance, hard as that may be. Just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter. Cold or warm, tired or well rested, despised or honored. All that said, this lesson does tie in directly to treating others well, because in any way that you better yourself, you then enable yourself to be better for others. To use the main example of this video, Bubble Bass convinced SpongeBob, against what he knew to be true, that he couldn't make a good Krabby Patty. That then led to SpongeBob not doing his job. So Squidward essentially was feeding people rocks. I hope the idea is now clear. If SpongeBob had brushed off the insults and lies as simply that, the customers wouldn't have had to endure that lack of good food, and Squidward wouldn't have had to endure work he didn't know how to properly execute, as well as the disapproval of the entire town. This whole scenario is similar to another episode that I mentioned in a previous video called Oral Report. Within the episode, SpongeBob is rehearsing and practicing his report that he's due to speak on in boating school. He's having no issue with it whatsoever, but just then, as Squidward overhears SpongeBob practicing, he tells him, "You know, SpongeBob, statistics show that public speaking is the number 3 cause of stress, right behind death and marriage. Let's even say that that was a fact. Everything depends on one's thinking. A man is unhappy as he convinced himself he is." I'm not sure if everything depends on your thinking, but hopefully the relevant point is clear here. Act non-fearful and you'll end up feeling non-fearful. And as a side note, Dennis Prager actually is currently in the hospital due to an injury that he suffered, so I implore you to pray for his quick recovery. I hope that the point is becoming clear, and if it's not, allow me to explain one more example to hopefully drive the point home. I heard a story years ago. I don't know if it was true or not, but regardless, the principle remains. There was a boxer that was told his gloves would harden as he continues to fight and as the rounds go on. So he did fight, expecting that to happen, and by the 3rd round, he had won the fight. Come to find out, the gloves didn't change at all. He was simply more capable than he thought, and he was convinced he was going to have an advantage, and therefore, he did. Again, the idea being that encouragement and discouragement are powerful, but only as powerful as you let it be. If someone tries to discourage you, don't let them. If someone is encouraging you, then receive it to the fullest extent you can. And as a side note, encourage others as you yourself wish to be. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Words are powerful, so learn how to use them for good and how to defend yourself and others against them when used for attacks. In this idea of defending yourself and others from a bully or anything of the sort without becoming a bully yourself in the process is talked about and discussed at length in a recent video of mine, so do check it out if you're interested. If you did enjoy this video and support my message, understand that my main inspiration is the Bible. Though I wouldn't call what I'm presenting a sermon, if I adjusted a few things here and there, it very well could be. So if you don't know the Lord, there's no better time to begin a relationship with Him than now. Romans 10 verse 9 says that if you confess with your mouth Jesus as Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. So I highly recommend you do so. Thank you so much for watching. I sincerely hope that this helps you. So apply it today, apply it whenever and wherever applicable. Remember to treat others the way that you want to be treated and to love God and love your neighbor, and therefore you will continue to be a good person. Thank you for watching, and as always, it's an honor.